So we were talking about making the move up to UTC and the family lifestyle and what attracted you to the university. When you got up there and began your college career, what was it like adjusting to that college room and the environment?
Well, I've been thinking about that. And so let me tell you, so I was young for like my grade. When I came up to UTC, I was still 17 years old.
Wow.
And so, because my birthday was in October. And so, I was a kind of a baby face. And and at the time, man, you had guys in the room. You had you had Buckshaw. Ruffalo had just graduated.
Mhm.
Um, you had Thornberry. I'm gonna miss people, but you had Howard Langford. You had Tom Sell. Um, you had Mark Allison. You had a guy named Chris Artolona.
Mhm.
Chris Artolona uh, beat Sean O'Day, and everyone knows the story, but it was at the Ohio Open, and Artolona beat Sean O'Day, who ended up being a two-time NCAA champion. And
Wow.
I think that year probably placed third. Chris Artolona was tough. Him and I wrestled off my freshman year, and of course he beat me. And so, but man, Artolona, Allison, um, Tom Sell, Howard Langford, and then there was no, you couldn't hide. I mean, the only place you could hide was if you wrestled, some of the incoming freshmen that were, maybe, not, hammers,
Right.
but there wasn't many of those either.
Mhm.
Even if you went down, so as a 42 pounder, right? So I had Allison, Artolona, Tom Sell was no fun to wrestle. I'll tell you that right now.
Duracell.
Tom Sell was, uh, wrestling him was a miserable experience. And that's a compliment. But man, he was tough. Um, and then if you went down, okay, to 34, you had a guy, and you need to interview this guy if you haven't already. You had Clarence Arrington waiting for you at 34.
Wow.
And Clarence Arrington was, when we would lift, he would have Coach Reeve had us doing, 10 sets of 10 on power cleans. I think we did that two or three times a week. And Clarence would have, and Clarence is a decorated war veteran, and Clarence would have 225 on there, and he would
Jeez.
be doing power cleans, just cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. He was tough. His nickname was Squirrel, and so he was strong, mean, good wrestler. Um, and then if you went down to 26, even if 1/8, I can't remember if it was 18 or 26, whatever. But you had Ben Reichel down there. Reichel was tough. I mean, and here those guys had been with Coach Reeve for 4 or 5 years now, doing all those power cleans, doing all the squats, climbing the ropes, doing the chin ups, running the bleachers,
Right.
and then Coach Reeve was a great technician, and he could really boil technique down and teach it to a massive, to 40 guys in a room, and everyone could get something out of it, and it was going to be beneficial for everybody. And so that was the thing with Coach Reeve, was he could take a room of guys that were not blue chippers. We didn't have many blue chippers, but we had hard workers, and we had tough guys. And so Coach Reeve could work with that, and he could get that group up to here. I mean, when I was a freshman, I may have my dates off on this, but we dueled Michigan, um, Ohio State. I think it was the year, and I don't think we beat them, but there was 10 matches. 10 matches, I think we split five each. Like we
Wow.
won five, they won five. UTC was no joke. We were well respected. When I went to the NCAA tournament that year, as a freshman. To watch it now, not to wrestle in it, because Allison, I actually wrestled my freshman year because Artelona, I think he was didn't wrestle that year, the second semester, and I think Allison had a bad knee or a bad back the first half, so I wrestled my first semester, and so I didn't redshirt, but when those guys came back, I wasn't going to beat them, and so when I went to the NCAA tournament to watch it, Thornberry's in the, if I got this right, Thornberry's in the blood round
Yep.
and loses by riding time. Reichel had bad draws and he had tough guys. Clarence Arrington it was a horrible draw. If you're in the NCAA tournament, his first match, I'm horrible with this stuff, but I think he had a 6th ranked guy, and Clarence was pushing him all over the mat, and the guy caught him in something. Buckshaw, if I got this right, Buckshaw made it to the quarters 2 years in a row. That's
because your freshman year would have been 89, right?
So I graduated in 88. So
okay.
So I would have been 88, 89 would have been my freshman year. So it would have been 89. Yes. The NCAA tournament would have been 89.
Yeah, so 89, you got Buckshot 190. Yeah, he made it to the quarters.
Yeah,
I remember the
Thorny.
year before he made it and had Royce Alger in the quarters.
Yeah.
But I think him and Thornberry both either made it to the round of 3 or the round of 4. So that would have been the blood round or the round right before it.
Let me tell you, Tom Sell was an awful draw. If you drew him in the NCAA tournament, he was going to make your life miserable. I mean, you were going to, and then you had Gus. I forgot Gus. You had Brett Gustafson. He was, and Brett was my roommate for 1 year. No, 2 years, 2 years. And Gus was like living with my older brother. I mean, he would pick on me, and so anyway, Brett, Brian Flint, so that room, man, it was a tough room, and you just survived. You made it. You took it minute by minute, practice by practice, and you just survived. And if you survived, you got better.
Mm-hmm.
If you just survived, you got better. There was no other option. There was no other option but to get better unless you quit.
Right.
In my freshman year, we probably had 20 kids in our recruiting class. And I think by the time we finished, there was probably 3 or 4 of us that made it through it. And that's not to say that, the guys that didn't make it through that, that they were quitters or anything. Life happens. I mean, I've got a good friend, Dan Sandoval. He was in college and he was working a job. He was going to school. He was wrestling, and you just can't. He had to give it up. He had to work a job. He's working 20 hours a week. There's no room for, So, some guys would get dinged up. And so Fred Canan was a 2-time state champion for Florida. Fred was tough as nails. And Fred, passed away some years ago with I think it was an aneurysm. But Fred he quit and went to the military, and so he became another decorated, veteran for UTC. We had a guy named Chris Cochran. Mm-hmm. Chris Cochran's brother was an All-American at UT Knoxville, and Chris Cochran was tough, but he got a really bad knee injury. He had bad knees coming into it. Then he got a bad knee injury, and you just can't. It's just hard to go 4 or 5 years. And you got a bad wheel or a bad shoulder. Right. So I say that if you could stay injury free and you could make it through, you were going to get better. Mm-hmm. You were going to get tougher. And so that room was tough. It was intense. There was, we had these dip bars in the corner and these things called horses that you do these reverse, things, for your lower back.
Right.
And there would be guys getting run into those things, you never wanted to get run into the horses or the dip bars. It was just a painful thing.
Oh,
Wrestling would go off the mat, you'd be on the wood or the, I mean, it was, it was a tough room. Coach Reeve took a bunch of guys and we were UTC wrestling was no joke. It was no joke. And it's not a joke today either. I don't mean it like that. But
right.
what I'm saying is back then it was it was tough. We were a tough team. We were a tough team.
Well, you mentioned the intensity that was in that room, and the intensity very much is still there today.
Yes.
But a particular story that comes to mind anytime that's brought up when I interviewed Bud Hennenballer, he told me, and it's Tom Sells' story. Um, they were doing pressure drills one
Yeah.
night, and Tom Sell has Mark Allison backed up against the wall,
Yeah.
and I mean, obviously, the point of pressure drill is keeping the pressure on somebody, staying in their face, and Mark starts punching him
Yes.
while he's still got him backed up against the wall, and
Yep.
Tom's still right in his face, and Ethan or Coach Reeve looks over to Bud Henneball. He's like, "I like it," you know. And it's type of war stories like that go and make a wrestling room unique.
Yes.
The stuff that goes on behind the scenes.
Oh yeah. Ralph Manning's first practice. So I had Coach Reeve for I think 2 years, and Coach Manning for 3 years. And Coach Manning's first day in the practice, we had two wrestlers that got in a fight. And it was it was before practice started and they went at it. And it was like a UFC fight. I mean,
Yeah.
there was blood everywhere and it was tough. Coach Reeve did a great job, and Coach Manning was different than Coach Reeve. Coach Manning was much. He was a little not as regimented as Coach Reeve was, but for some guys, that for me having Coach Reeve for 2 years was amazing. That's what I needed because I came in. I'd never done a power clean, never climbed a rope. And so I wasn't, real strong physically, coming into the program. But my technique from my high school coach was amazing. I mean, his technique was just absolutely amazing. And so I had a good base of coaching of technique. And then Coach Reeve, I had him for 2 years so I got the strength thing down and the pressure and all that kind of stuff. And then Coach Manning came in and he kind of, would let you work on some of your own stuff. And so I think that was, for me, that was that was helpful, but so I had a nice blend of coaches, you know.
Right. Well, you mentioned Reeves' style, and
Yeah.
you mentioned Ralph Manning's style of it being a little bit more open, and that
Yeah.
reminds me a little bit of what Jim Morgan's style a
Yeah.
little bit, and
Yes.
a example of the different aspects of coaching. And Ruffalo mentioned it when I interviewed him. Is you look at Charlie Hurt.
Yeah.
According to Ruffalo, he was somebody that you couldn't really put him in a regiment because of his style was
Yeah.
so unique.
Yes.
And
So another one like that was Gustafson.
mhm,
Oh, Brett was you need to interview Brett. So Brett, he had this very unique style, and I'm gonna butcher this, but he he would he would he had a great dump. And so
mhm.
so he would take a shot and guys would underhook him to, like down block, and he would dump him, and if that didn't work, he would drag him out, and then he'd come up on their feet and over under. He had a body lock. He could come around, hop around and throw you, and then he had this reverse headlock. He had this really uh, very unique style. And so, uh, he was a nightmare to wrestle. He was tough on top. And so, but Brett was, I was talking about this earlier, but he was my roommate. And so, I'll tell you what, rooming with Gustafson was very helpful for me because we were tough in the room and all that kind of stuff. But he brought a he was able to extract a meanness when he wrestled. He was real. He was tough and mean, and so he was able to pull that out of me, and and him and I would, we'd go down, and at 10 o'clock at night we'd go down to the wrestling room, and the other thing about Gus was he liked to do video review type stuff, and so we'd get a VHS of something and dissect it, and so he liked to kind of study technique, and I love that. I mean,
Mhm.
I would I would always order like the Olympics or the World Championships or the NCAA's. You'd tape them and all that, and I was kind of I loved watching that and kind of seeing what people were doing. But you have to eat the meat, and spit the bones out, because you can't use everything. And so I did watch a lot of technique, and then I tried to just see what I could use for because I wasn't like super explosive, so I had to have a different style, more of a grinding type style, and I was kind of long for my weight class, but anyway, so yeah.
Well, you mentioned that style and just that the kind of mean side, I'd say really scrappy side, and I'm gonna come back to that here in a second. But continuing on that topic of your college career, um, going into your junior year, you're at 142 pounds. You won the SoCon Trophy, punch your ticket to Oklahoma State. What was your mindset and what were you feeling leading up to the NCAA championships after the SoCon tournament?
Okay, so here's the deal. So I started that year, and I was going back to that. I wasn't a great student. I was academically ineligible the first semester. I had really, my grades were bad. And so I had to pass about 18 credit hours, and I had to actually make A's and B's in it, which was very challenging. And so I wrestled in some open tournaments at 158 that freshman year. I mean, that junior year. And so, which was kind of nice. I kind of like that. I wasn't cutting weight and all that. So going into the second semester, it's kind of fresh. So I bumped down to 150.
Mm-hmm.
Well, waiting there at 150 was a guy named Mike Newman.
Mm-hmm.
And so Mike Newman, his legs are like tree trunks, and he was a solid 150 pounder. And him and I were drill partners. And Mike was a great drill partner because he wouldn't let you cut corners, and he wouldn't make it easy on you. And Coach Reeve had us finishing with lifts. So when you shoot a single, a high crotch or a double, you had to finish it with a lift. So I was having to do, like power cleans with Mike Newman, and that's not a lot of fun. And so because he was so stocky, and anyway, I remember one time I was so sick of it. Coach Reeve threw me out of the practice one day. I think it was because I wouldn't lift Newman, and so. But listen, his center of gravity is so low. I was tired of it. And so anyway, so Newman and I wrestled off, I want to say 7 times. And I have Coach Manning, I don't know if you'll ever admit this or not, but Coach Manning wanted Newman at 150. And I think he was going to wrestle us off. And they were the most boring matches ever. They were 1 point matches, just hardly any takedowns, extremely boring. And so he finally won the last wrestle off. And so I was like, it's what am I going to do? And so I called my old high school coach and I said, you think I should cut to 42? And he's like, yeah, you should cut to 42. Cause he was coaching at the time, Goody was coaching at Clemson.
Okay.
And so he had a feel for the ACC and in that weight class and all that in the who was out there. He said you should cut to 142. He said I think you could do pretty good at 142. And I said all right, I'll cut it. And so I was running to make that. I was running. I would run about 3 miles to school because I lived off campus. I'd run about 2 or 3 miles to school, go to class occasionally, and then I would go to practice, and then I'd run home, And then at night I'd take another run. So I was putting in about probably 6 to 8 miles of running. I had an old 10 speed somewhere, and I'd ride the 10 speed, and I was cutting a lot of weight. And so making the weight was really the hardest part. And I went to Coach Manning and I said, Coach, I don't think I can make it. And he said, listen, this was brilliant coaching by Coach Manning. He said, listen, just make it for the SoCon,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't have to make it again. But what he knew was if I qualified for the SoCon, there was no way I wasn't going to make it for the NCAAs.
Right.
And so it was great coaching. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. And I made it. And I beat a guy in the finals. I had Balmacito in the semis, and Victor was tough from Appy State. And then I had the Pitts guy from VMI, and I beat him in the finals. And man, I tell you, the pressure of winning conference when it's the only way you're going to really go to the NCAA tournament, because we didn't have many wild cards or anything like that.
Right.
There's none of that going on. That was a huge relief. And really, because when I was a freshman, I wrote my goals down. I said, I want to be a 3-time conference champion, and I want to be a 2-time NCAA All-American, and I want to be an NCAA champion. And I knew the NCAA champion thing was, kind of a stretch, but what the heck. And so, and then I wrote down, how am I going to accomplish these? And I had a plan, like, I got to work out, I got to do 2-a-days. I got to watch video. I got to do this. I got to do that. And so I had a pretty detailed plan, like, okay, if you want to do this, how are you going to get there? And that kind of helped me stay along the track. And so anyway, so we go to the NCAAs, we get off the plane, we go eat spaghetti dinner somewhere in Oklahoma City, and I get on the scale, and I think I'm like 14 pounds overweight.
Wow.
And so, but it was night before weigh-ins. So, I had 20 hours to cut the weight. So you'd always get there a day early, right? And so I made the weight. I remember putting my plastics on and all that. And I was in Oklahoma City, and I could just run forever back then because I was in good shape. And so I said, I'm just going to run. I'm in Oklahoma City. I'm just going to run straight, and then when I get tired, I'll turn around. So I just ran, and then I said, okay, it's probably a good time to turn around. I had to turn around, but I made the weight. First match in the tournament, I got the number 2 guy. I'm a pigtail, and I got the number 2 guy from Oklahoma State, Chris Owens.
Mm-hmm.
And I was feeling good. I'd cut all this weight, and he was a 34 pounder, really, but he couldn't beat out whoever they had. I don't know who was at 34 then. It was Alan Freed or Chuck Barbie or someone. Anyway,
it was
Owens
was Freed, yeah.
Okay, so Owens couldn't beat him, but so he had to bump up. So I thought, I'm bigger than this guy. I feel like I'm stronger, and I said, I'm gonna go after him. Well, he pinned me. Okay. It was the first pin of the tournament, and it was at Oklahoma. Basically, it was Oklahoma State, and so the crowd went nuts. And so then I was feeling sorry for myself, and I was kind of I think back then, don't quote me on this, I think the guy that beat you had to win his next match to carry you back into it, but don't quote me on that. But I remember sitting in the stands thinking, I just want to eat. And so, but the next match came up, and I had to wrestle a guy, and I think it was a guy that had beat me the year before, and I won a squeaker. It was a tight one. And then then another match, and it maybe had been Ohio State or someone, and I won. And so then you start getting into, maybe it was Friday, and so I got a guy from North Carolina, and the good thing about this was my high school coach was at the NCAA tournament coaching for Clemson.
Wow.
And Coach Manning and him were friends. And so Coach Manning comes to him and says, hey, Goody, will you help Harris make weight? And so so my high school coach is there coaching for Clemson, but he's also helping me make weight. And he locked me in the sauna every 3 minutes. He would, throw water on me. And so he knew about the North Carolina kid. He said, I think you could beat this guy. And so I beat him in the last 10 seconds. I think I hit like a super duck on him. And then so now I go to the next thing is the blood round. And so, you know, I'm thinking, well, is this it? If I win, this is it. You're an All-American. And I thought, okay, all right, I got one more. And so I ate and drank because I thought, well, might as well go all chips in here, right? And so I ended up winning. Is John Dasta from Clarion, and he had a great single leg. And the thing about it was he had a great single leg to my lead leg, which was my, I felt like I had a pretty good defense on that lead leg. And so we were for me, he was a very good matchup. And what also helped was in the quarters, Steiner just beat the dog out of him. So I remember we were in the elevator and he had both of his shoulders iced up, and Newman was in the elevator with me, and Newman nudged me and he goes, that's who you got next. I said, oh, good. And so anyway, so yeah. So I won the blood round match, and I was gonna injury default out because I didn't think I could make the weight the third day. And so I asked the referee, I said, hey, if I don't make weight, am I still an All-American? And the one ref said yes. And so I started to eat and drink a little bit. And so so someone, or in the back of my mind, or someone told me, says, you better get a second opinion on that. So I asked another ref, and the ref said, no, you got to make weight.
Yeah.
I said, oh, God, I got to make weight. So anyway, so you could weigh in at night, or you could weigh in the next morning. And so I wasn't even close to making it at the nighttime. So I made it the next morning. I think I was the only guy there weighing in. Anyway, so then I had Shiflett from where's Shiflett from Edinburgh, and then Miller from Maryland. Those guys were good. They beat me. So I placed eighth. I got in, but at that day, at that tournament, I was the eighth best guy, but if you would have wrestled that tournament, 10 other times, that it could, who knows how it would have, ended.
Well, to go on I think one thing that makes it so notable, one being, I want to say because you have, I think after you, it was Langford,
Yep.
Cody Cleveland, Matt Keller, Keith. I'm pretty sure I might be missing one, and sorry if I am, but I believe those were the next All-Americans for D1.
Yeah, Howard and I were the same year.
Okay, so 92.
Yeah.
And y'all both got eighth, I believe.
Yeah, and let me tell you about Howard. Howard was a machine. He had just come back. I think he had a military redshirt year or something. And I think he was, if I got this right, I think he was overseas and he came back. So he was like a 6-year senior, and Howard was just, I mean, strong, good wrestler. Howard was beating good guys that year. He had beat Hovine from Pitt that year in a dual meet and just manhandled him. And Hovine was a top 5 guy. And so Howard cracked his ribs in that NCAA tournament.
Wow.
I want to say it was against Mike Schick from Florida, actually, and who wrestled for Ohio State. Schick was tough. I think he was 2-time All-American. And Howard cracked his ribs somewhere in that tournament. And so basically wrestled the tournament with cracked ribs. But if that, Howard was legit. And Howard, without cracked ribs, I'm sure would have placed much, much higher.
Well, I'm definitely been meaning to get him on here soon. But going back to what I was saying, I think one thing that makes that All-American run so unique is one, it puts you in that class of NCAA Division I All-Americans, and it's not common that you drop the first match and wrestle all the way back. Because that's a tough bracket, no matter what way you are, to wrestle through all of that and still All American at the end of the day.
Yeah. I didn't have the toughest draw. I had a tough draw and I had a really nice draw because I had a really good guy in the first match. And then the other ranked guys I wrestled was the number 8 guy in the blood round. And then after the blood round, I had the number,
I think it was 6.
yeah, Miller from Maryland, and then Shiflett. I wrestled Shiflett for 7th and 8th. But in between there, the 4 that I had to beat, only one of those guys was ranked 8th. But listen, at the NCAA tournament, there's no slouches. I mean, but I had a good draw because I did have a high rank guy at the beginning, and then my other ranked guys were kind of towards the end. So the run of the 3 or 4 in the wrestle back was one of those guys was the 8th ranked guy, and I met in the blood round. So I was, listen, we've had some really tough wrestlers come out of UTC,
Mm-hmm.
and you get in that tournament, and if you get a crappy draw, man, it's tough. It's really tough. So there's a lot of things that have to happen for that. And I was, thank God, I was able to stay injury free. Like I say, there was guys that were tough, man, and they'd pick up an injury, and it just wouldn't be the same. But I was able to stay injury free. I had really a good coaching tree that I came through. I had supportive parents. And so I've been, I've been blessed with that, so because a lot of things have to go right. A lot of things have to go right.
Right. Well, all in all, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate getting to talk to you about wrestling, your career, and UTC and everything of that nature. It's been a pleasure to get to talk about it once again, and hope all's well and that everything goes well going forward.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Really appreciate it. I watched a lot of them. So you're doing a great job.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Like I've said before, it's a awesome opportunity to be able to do this and be able to connect with so many people, especially on the wrestling scene, and network with a lot of people. I've had a lot of cool opportunities to talk to a lot of good characters in the wrestling world through this,
Oh
and
yeah.
it takes two to make it happen. So a lot of gratitude and appreciation goes out to my guests who've been willing to hop on and discuss their career and their teammates and everything of that nature.
Yeah. Enjoyed it. I enjoyed it.
But thank you, and like I said, take care and hope to see you again soon.
All right. You got it. Thanks, Mason.
Appreciate it. Thank you.